Hey everyone, and welcome back to the news. It's crazy, the news just doesn't stop. Being so close to the holidays, I thought this would be a low-key week, but far from it. Blizzard have greatly downscaled one of their games. They are suffering from a very poorly timed store mount that's giving them pretty bad optics, but actually for the WoW team, it's not all bad. Ian actually shared a very positive future for the Azerite system in patch 8.2. That's reasonably exciting. Now, before we get into it, after a few delays, the art for this month's Patreon finally arrived. It is very nice. We've got our festive Yeti, we've got our, well, festive scene, and you can get this stuff over on the Patreon as well as a bunch of other things. So, a big thank you to them, and in these, sort of odd, troubling times for YouTube, their support means a great deal. Okay, let's get into it. So, with Tides of Vengeance being such a large topic, I think the first thing for today's video has to be the Q&A and what was covered. So, Tides of Vengeance has had a sort of troublesome launch. To cut a long story short, it does not have a wealth of content, and a number of its core changes went unexplained. Now, this at worst has led to quite a lot of anger, but more commonly with the community, to me, it seems like it's just failed to re-engage the people who are feeling apathetic towards the game. Now, this was probably not expected when this Q&A was penciled into Ian's schedule, but it absolutely is what he had to deal with when he did the Q&A. So first, the topic of communication. And I think the best way to talk about communication is through the stuff that he addressed. Now, the Mythic Plus Keystone deletion, that was a result of their hotfix to the bug where Legion Keystone progress continued into BfA, and that gave people really silly Mythic Plus keys. So, Blizzard hotfixed in the ability to delete and re-roll keys to solve that problem, but they just did not think about the unintended consequences where it essentially let people be really picky about what keys they wanted to do. Now, this was changed because of those Legion launch problems. They don't seem to have thought that much about it, but it obviously led to all of these, just led to the community things where people would just say, oh, Seth Rallis? Nah, in the bin. And much of this stems from, I would say, the trash and stuff like that of the current dungeons being harder than that of Legion. Now, what Ian said is that they are actually working on balancing hotfixes, especially on trash that are aimed at fixing up damage spikes. Overall, I think that's pretty great, and, if that was the main highlight, they could have done this as a positive, because imagine if, weeks ago, they had have said, look guys, we're going to prevent you from deleting keystones, but at the same time, we're going to retune dungeons to solve problems that made you want to re-roll your keys. They could have actually done that and had it be sold as a positive, but instead, because they've had to do it now and be reactive and, allowed it to play into the narrative of them having bad communication, well, it didn't work out. So it's odd. It's like something that totally could have been a PR win ended up being a PR loss because of a lack of foresight. Next, artifact knowledge. So Blizzard said that this was always intentional and that it just so happened that it lined up with the patch 8.1 release dates. Now, Ian did admit that that sounds a little bit suspicious, but he did point out that AK had caps in Legion, and that is absolutely true, and he said that because of this, he just did not think much about the change. Well, as I said in my original coverage of this, I think the main problem is the general dissatisfaction with AP progression itself in BfA, combined with the disappointment over the lack of communications. This drama would not have happened if Blizzard had, maybe in their launch notes for this expansion, said that AK will continue until a weekly cap at about a certain date. So, yeah, I think it's a pretty simple one, really. Then, as for the profession armor thing, that was a bug. It was internally treated as a bug because it was a bug-like fix that was done based on a submission from QA, and because of that, they just didn't think about the consequences. Now, it's worth noting that Ian did say that what happened with that profession gear was unacceptable. That one does seem like a genuine mistake, which of course is not ideal, and it definitely was not timing that helped them. Then, there were a bunch of changes to dungeons that were made internally back in September, like with the Underroot mobs, and they basically just slipped through the cracks because they happened ages ago. So that's what Ian said, and overall, I do think a lot of that seems quite fair. It is just, though, a level of disorganization that's not good for a live surface game, and a lot of these changes should be communicated earlier. A few days back, I said that this stuff mostly seems to be the symptom of poorly functioning internal systems at the company, and almost everything that Ian said backs up that. So how could this be solved? Well, I'd say by fixing up systems. That's going to take them time to get right internally, and they say it's something that they're working on really hard, but they've said that a few times before and they have not produced the results. So I welcome what they're saying, but equally I think we need to recognize that unfortunately their intent has not always lined up with their results. Next up, Azerite. So Ian was quite frank about the current situation being frustrating, about re-unlocking traits feeling bad. Now, what's exciting is that Season 2 is going to be the last of the current style of Azerite gear because 8.2 is revamping and overhauling it. Now, this all starts with the Heart of Azeroth. Right now, it's boring as hell. So Blizzard's original plan was for the constant unlocking and re-unlocking of traits to be a parallel to how unlocking the first 36 traits of your artifact felt quite good in Legion, but for that to actually last. Well, that has not panned out, and they're pretty much abandoning it. So first, there's going to be a lot more lore and story with Magni and the Heart. Now, this is going to result in the Heart unlocking powers itself, that's where AP will be going. Then Azerite gear will drop with all traits unlocked, so that you're free to select whatever you want. Then your Heart of Azeroth level will actually still matter, though, because it will scale up the potency of your various traits. Now, we're going to have to see how all of this actually works and actually balances out. Suffice to say, I like it. I mean, it's almost exactly what I suggested months ago, just after BfA launched. So, I mean, yeah, of course I'm going to be happy about it. It's lining up with what I think they should have done from the beginning. Now, what's interesting to me is this seems to be a new direction, because their communications got to the point of lore saying that re-unlocking traits might just be a part of this system that we would have to live with for the duration of the expansion. So the fact that this is now what's happening in 8.2 makes me feel like it's a recent development, and that the dev team are feeling the pressure of feedback. Overall, for me, this seems like a general outline of Azerite that seems far better, and if 8.2 has this better Azerite, the better acquisition, better world content, it does seem like it'll be a genuinely better game. So that's most of what I think there. We don't actually have hard changes, but we know that their broad strokes, things that they want to do to Azerite, are actually quite positive. And there's actually a bit that might bode well for future expansions, because Ian essentially did say that their current mode of operation, where class development happens through an external expansion long system like the Artifact or the Azerite, he said that is basically, it hasn't panned out to be as satisfying as the developers have intended, and that it might be something that they relook in the future. So Azerite could be the last iteration of this style of system before they move on to something different. Now, there is one point of disappointment for me, and that is that he didn't address how many, including myself, think that the class changes of 8.1 are pretty lackluster, especially for the shamans. So it's a little bit disappointing that wasn't covered. I know that typically they do want to talk about the broad strokes things, but in this case, I think an exception for that might have been useful. So that's the super important stuff, but let's quick fire through the rest. Now, the cross-realm RP add-on that was broken due to the changes, that essentially happened because those changes needed to happen for security reasons, but Blizzard do intend to add an elixir that will let people understand the opposite faction in an RP realm. So if an Alliance and Horde RP guild wants to do a scene together, they can all use that elixir. Next, on the topic of repeatable residuum, basically they said that it's there for Mythic plus Azerite acquisition, and that they know that if it was like repeatable and farmable, people will just farm themselves crazy. Now, also on that topic, the currency values for costs and earnings will basically 10x with Season 2. So the idea is that it's not really efficient to save up, but you still kind of can if you want to, even though you're not going to get a massive amount of benefit. For the team, it just means they don't have like 4 different currencies, like, one for every season. Overall, I think a pretty good way of doing it. Then they also talked about seasons and war fronts. So each war front is actually mostly tied to a season. So in Season 2, Darkshore rewards will be bumped up by 15 item levels, but Stromguard ones will not. Blizzard's intent is that you can still do Stromguard if you would like to, but just like how Dazara lore makes Uldir less important, Darkshore in Season 2 makes Stromguard less important. So I guess that kind of means that Stromguard will exist for AP, Transmog, and Alt Catch-Up, but they don't really intend for mains to be fully participating in every single Warfront cycle. Now, there is one exception, and that is Heroic Mode. That is actually going to be available for both Warfronts in 8.2, I believe, and they will, scale in terms of difficulty. So you'll be able to do both Warfronts on Heroic Mode and get relevant gear. Moving on to that, we actually have a nice development for the Vicious PvP mounts. So in Season 2, your mount bar will actually be refillable after you complete it the first time, and each time you refill it, you will get a Vicious saddle. So that gives people, a good way to farm out those Vicious mounts if they want, instead of being 1 per season, which I think is great. Overall, as a Q&A, it's a challenging time for World of Warcraft. It's going to be hard for them to claw back from this. The Azerite stuff was very positive, a little bit disappointed in the class changes. There were 1 or 2 times where Ian was explaining a philosophy that at the end of the day, I kind of just don't really agree with that much. But overall, I think it was actually a very solid, a very good Q&A. I do wonder that if on some of those philosophical issues, that they might sort of change their mind over time, much like how they clearly have changed their tune when it comes to Azerite, and potentially even to the external class development reward systems like Azerite itself, just as a concept for the game. So overall, quite positive. But we do need to take a little bit of a turn into the strange territory of store mounts because Blizzard have released the next store mount. As always, it's gorgeous, it's unique, it's really well designed, and it absolutely is one of the highest quality mounts in the mount roster. And that's kind of the problem. The in-game mounts that are available through, gold and other things, they tend to just be regular zone creatures with a saddle slapped on them. Now, don't get me wrong, many of them are lovely, like the new frog of 8.1, but it is the case that they don't have as much unique work being put into them. Now, that kind of does make sense. The store mounts are a license to print money, so of course they're going to, put that effort where it gets the most return. Now, I think that the player reaction to store mounts is actually a very solid measure of general sentiment towards the game. If the game is doing well with lots of content, people do not mind store mounts. But if the game is doing poorly, as with Warlords of Draenor and its store mounts, then yeah, they're not well received at all. Now, there's really not a massive amount to read into this, to be honest with you. The world of Warcraft is in a pretty mixed state. Blizzard have not had positive headlines. Therefore, people are going to be less accepting of additional asks from the company, such as from this. Now, WoW Token does make this a little bit more interesting, because as many have pointed out, it is a good bit better now that you can just convert gold into BNet balance and then purchase the mount. On a surface level, I agree, that is a bit better. However, I think it's a nice aside. I don't think it's really the core of the issue. At the end of the day, if this was the prevailing logic, then why bother putting it on the store when you could just have it be in-game for the cost of 5 tokens worth of gold, because that would be enough to get about the same profit. The truth is, the store mount framing makes it stand out, and that framing comes along with the mounts being of exceedingly high quality. As for my take, I don't like the store mount stuff, and I think that content would do more good if it was in the game. However, some quick napkin maths does show that it's a business no-brainer, and Token is a mitigating factor towards it. Much of this would be helped if Blizzard had a wider range of in-game mounts that were of a similar quality, but doing so is hard because reusing this model and rig erodes the uniqueness of the store mount, and therefore it burns the people who bought the store mount. I think what's more important to all this is optics. This was just the wrong time to release a mount. Now, it almost certainly was planned far, far in advance. And knowing that is fine, but it doesn't change how dissatisfied people will feel. Releasing it now is just terrible optics for Blizzard, and I think it would have been wise to bump those earnings back into the same quarter as Rise of Ashara. Blizzard are just often, honestly, terrible at playing their hand, and much of it seems to stem from them being a large corporation that has proven itself to be inflexible. Next, we've got to move on to the sad but not entirely unexpected news of the essential gutting of Heroes of the Storm. Blizzard have announced that elements of the dev team are being moved over to unannounced projects and that the game's esports ecosystem is being cancelled. It's flat out being cancelled. The HGC and Heroes of the Dorm will not return in 2019. And that's not a surprise to me. Heroes of the Storm is a perfectly fine game, but I don't think it's one that people really asked for. It came into the market quite late, after the incumbents had established their dominance over the market. Heroes actually started off as a StarCraft 2 mod that basically they liked so much that they decided to make it into a full game. And I've got to wonder if that decision making was just a bit carried away. Perhaps, they really just wanted that MOBA dollar and they were frustrated over letting Dota slip from their grasp. Because Heroes, it never really had a large esports scene, it didn't pull in large viewership numbers, and Blizzard were just pumping resources into it in their attempt to non-organically create an esports scene. Contrast that with StarCraft 2, wherein Blizzard followed the third-party orgs instead of trying to build the ecosystem 100% themselves. Looking at Overwatch, I worry that the Overwatch setup is really fragile, because they pretty much purchased MLG and then decided that they would have a big esports scene for the game. Now, the popularity of Overwatch, allowed for that to work, where it didn't work for Heroes, but it does make you wonder how financially efficient the Overwatch operation is and how healthy it's going to be once the growth continues to slow down, because it is slowing. For me, it's not surprising. I think it was a self-indulgent game that people didn't really ask for, though I'll happily admit it was decently fun and had a lot of polish to it. A lot of love went into it. Ultimately, though, it probably doesn't make sense to put that many resources into it in comparison to other things. And this is where it gets tricky. We know Blizzard has multiple unannounced games, and the community is particularly focused on the mobile ones. So the timing of this announcement feeds into the current prevailing narrative that Blizzard is a company that is disconnected from the desires of its customers and that it's shifting resources over to mobile. Much like with the store mounts, it's bad optics for Blizzard. There's just no denying that. Now, the other really bad part of this that basically does just go against one of Blizzard's mission statements is just how they did not do it deftly. So you know that big, unsustainable esports scene that seemingly had everything bar strong viewership? Well, Blizzard just pulled funding from the whole thing, and that means that many teams and support staff and just everything involved with the scene, everyone involved with the scene, they're now out of a job. That sucks. And the way that they dropped it on people really sucks. They essentially led teams on, saying that it would continue. I know that people were reporting that in BlizzCon, or during BlizzCon, people were saying that like HGC and stuff will be returning in 2019, and they're just ironing out the details. So they did string on a lot of people, and then they axed it. And when you compare that, look at, say, their moral policy thing that's on their site. Yeah, guys, you really did go against the core value there. You really messed up how you announced this and how you took care of the people who, you kind of led down this bizarre road with. You kind of owed it to those people to do this bit right, and you definitely didn't do it right. Really, to me, though, it's just clear that Blizzard was not getting a strong return on the esports scene for this game, but their willingness to take the leap of cutting it, that could be because of the Activision influence. We recently covered Jason Schreier's article on, the new information about Blizzard, their new CFO from Activision, their drive to reduce costs, and their drive to ship more games, and their mobile segment, and then, of course, the whole Diablo debacle. Well, cutting Heroes Esports and moving developers onto other products, that's absolutely in line with the goal of cutting costs and shipping more product. Perhaps the Blizzard of years back wouldn't have done it in this way, but the modern Blizzard that now faces more corporate oversight certainly does seem to be willing to. Now, I suppose as a fan of StarCraft, it does make me a bit worried, but it does seem like the StarCraft audience does actually tune in for events, and unlike with Heroes, StarCraft has a more healthy third-party scene. I doubt the Home Story Cup will ever be as flashy as the WCS Finals, but at the end of the day, I don't care about flashy lights, I don't care about all of your casters pretending they're big fancy boys with sports jackets, I'm just there to watch good games. I mean, I guess it is just kind of cringy when they pump so much money into trying to emulate something like the traditional sports scene that many gamers actually just don't give a toss about. Now, next, there was some talk from the actual dev team themselves, and essentially it seems like they had so much in the works, and they really felt like they were hitting their stride, and they're really sad. They said they would be continuing, lower content cadence though, and I just do wonder how many of the changes teased at BlizzCon will actually make it in. And, is this game going to be going on support mode? Or is it going to, maybe free from its esports demands, going to be a game that's more tailored towards the audience who actually plays it? It's hard to know, but yeah, there you go. I mean, man, the major headlines have just been a goddamn walloping for Blizzard over the last week. As for the WoW people, it is mixed. I'm genuinely excited to see where Azerite goes now that Ian has said that Season 2 is going to be the last incarnation of the current Azerite system. But equally, I'm not happy about the store mount. It's not a great thing to have happen. And, 8.1, it does add some good things. It also doesn't really do a lot to, counter the apathy. So overall, it's very mixed. But I suppose the one bit of news today, which is the Azerite one, that is giving us, an indication of the future, that is actually quite good. And it does go along with other good indications about patch 8.2. So because of that, I'm personally thinking that we might have a pretty dull 4 months for World of Warcraft, unless you're enjoying Dazara lore, which seems awesome. But there is a chance that for Nazjatar, things actually could be quite rosy. Like if we have a really good progression system, if we have a revamped style of world content, could actually be a lot better than what we have now. And I'm not saying that you should get a 6-month sub and stick with it until that happens. Maybe it is right for you to take a few months of a break and then to see if Blizzard are able to do it. But it just does seem like they know that 8.2 is their, it's their response. 8.1 is too close to the launch of BfA to do massive changes to the game. But 8.2 is far enough along the line that new designs can be developed in response to things that happened at that stage about 8 months prior. So that's my thoughts on that and my thoughts on World of Warcraft. I'm considering doing a video broadly talking about 8.1 and whether it might actually be able to feel like more of an expansion than the BfA launch, which in some ways actually felt like a bit of a contraction. So let me know what you think about all this stuff down in the comments. Thank you very much for watching this video, and if you want to check out all that really cool Patreon art, then the link is also down there. Cheers, and I'll see you next time.